Universidad ICESI. Es verdaderamente un placer contar con esta semana con la presencia de Doris Brodeur, a la cual quiero especialmente agradecer por haber tenido la gentileza de venir a Colombia. Ya es su cuarto viaje a Colombia, pero el primer viaje a Cali, y haber estado con nosotros esta semana en un trabajo intenso de estudiar los currículos de ingeniería. Realmente creo que Doris es como un apóstol del tema, muy comprometida con el tema de la educación e ingeniería, muy comprometida con ayudarnos a progresar. Yo creo que tal vez a algunos les he comentado antes de empezar que para nosotros es muy importante progresar y sobre todo ir hacia adelante, porque creo que nosotros somos pequeños, somos pocos, tenemos crisis en la educación e ingeniería, y creo que una reforma en la educación e ingeniería es algo que se impone en los currículos que nosotros tenemos. No podemos definitivamente seguir haciendo lo mismo que hemos venido haciendo durante 20 o 25 años en un país que se ha transformado y en un mundo que se ha transformado. Por eso creo que la presencia de Doris para acá, para nosotros, ha sido supremamente importante, y quisimos dedicar esta mañana también para compartir un poco, que Doris compartiera con ustedes sus conocimientos, sus experiencias y su profundo compromiso con el estándar del Cdio. Doris Brodeur es profesora del Instituto de Tecnología de Massachusetts. Doris es una persona que ha sido profesora en educación sobre todo, y trabaja como especialista en evaluación e investigación en proyectos relacionados con la educación en ingeniería en el MIT. Sus proyectos incluyen la iniciativa Cdio, de Bertrand Gordon MIT Engineering Leadership Program, y el proyecto de innovación en aeronáutica, en instrucción aeronáutica. Ella comenzó su cátedra, ella es profesora permanente en el MIT, tiene un tenure en el MIT en junio del año 2000. Su experiencia incluye, y la experiencia de Doris es sus otras vidas que ella muchas veces cuenta. Su experiencia en el Anna Maria College en Massachusetts, en Ohio University e Illinois State University, en la oficina de educación corporativa de la antigua AT&T, de los laboratorios de AT&T, y en la oficina de United Technology Corporation, y también ha trabajado en educación internacional en Botswana. Su interés en investigación y consultoría incluye la evaluación de competencias, la evaluación de programas, aprendizaje basado en problemas y desarrollo de profesores, del cuerpo profesoral. La doctora Brodeur está trabajando con profesores y líderes del MIT y otras universidades técnicas en Estados Unidos, Canadá y América Latina. Especialmente parte de su trabajo y su enorme compromiso con este trabajo se debe a que ella haya accedido a venir a Colombia a trabajar en el tema de educación en ingeniería, y sobre todo repensar el tema de la educación en ingeniería. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Doris, for being here. Welcome to the university. Welcome to know all the academic person of the other institution. Okay.
Buenos días. I am making some progress with my Espanol, but unless we want to be here for about 10 hours, I will speak in English because I can find the words more easily. I am very happy to be here in Colombia and in Cali. This is my 4th visit to Colombia, my first visit to Cali. And although I work for MIT, which is in Boston, and I lived in Boston for many years, I now live in La Florida. So last week when I was in Bogotá, I froze. Hace mucho frío. So when I arrived in Cali and got off the airplane and saw the palm trees and the heat, I said, I am home. It is La Florida. So I thank you for your warm welcome. You have been, Isesi, Decano Gonzalo, and all of Isesi has been just so very gracious and warm and welcoming. As Decano Gonzalo said, we have been working with a group of engineers this week for the whole week in a workshop. But I'd like to just give you an overview of the approach to curriculum reform that is part of a group that now is made up of more than 60 engineering programs around the world. A program that began at MIT and 3 universities in Sweden. And there are economic reasons why it was those 4. But now more than, I think those 60 programs comprise at least half as many countries, and in all the continents except Antarctica. So one of the things, first let me ask, there may be some of you in the audience who are not in engineering education. Is that the case? Who is not engineering? I did speak to the internship people. What is your program area?
Matemáticas.
Matemáticas, okay.
Psicóloga.
Psychology.
Yeah.
Gracias. Statistics, okay. And?
Industrial design.
Industrial design, not engineering. Okay, gracias. Because we're going to see that although, and the title of the talk is really the same title of the book. There is a book by the same name that will explain in much greater detail what I'm going to be talking about, though I'm not here to sell the book. So we'll go ahead. And I also want to thank, many of you are on vacation this week and have come to work. But you should know that the Isesi engineers not only have come on their vacation week, but we worked on your national holiday yesterday. So I really appreciate it. This is just an outline of where we're going with this. Okay? So the approach to curriculum reform and teaching reform, and we'll see what that CDIO means in a minute. But though we began our project, and most of those programs around the world are engineering of all kinds, the approach to curriculum design can be applied to any professional program. So if you are preparing architects, nurses, lawyers, people in the medical field, teachers for the elementary and secondary schools, the approach applies. And I'm going to try to point out how. Although most of my examples will be in engineering because this is where the work began. Think about your own programs and your own curriculum. Before you launch or get into any kind of curriculum reform, you should be very clear about why you're doing it, because it's going to be a long effort, and you don't want to be changing your curriculum if there was no need to do that in the beginning. So these are some of the reasons that many of the programs that have been working with us have given as the reason that they started curriculum reform to begin with. That now, not only in engineering, but a great deal in business management, and a great deal in a lot of professions, the focus in those professions is much more now on productivity, and especially on innovation and entrepreneurship. So there's a need to adjust the curriculum to pay attention to that. For many programs, there was a need to recruit students. Enrollment was down, or students were choosing something other than engineering. And this is a worldwide occurrence, a worldwide need. Fewer students seem to be going into engineering, and so that's the recruitment issue. And there was a problem with retention, keeping the students in university. We were also noticing that the students who were coming were much more diverse, and diverse in many different ways. Some were diverse economically, so there was a broader range of background in the students. Many more who are first generation university students, and they come from families where parents and aunts and uncles did not attend university. So we have populations for whom this is now a new opportunity, and we have to look at our programs. We have some programs, especially some kinds of engineering, where there's a change and a shift, and there are more women going into engineering, certain fields. Some fields that have always had as many women as men, but some, I would suspect, industrial engineering was probably more civil engineering. Whereas, for example, chemical engineering, at least the experience in the U.S., there have always been about as many women as men, but some areas of engineering. So when I talk about the diverse population, they're diverse by gender, they're diverse by the preparation they bring, they're different by culture. There have been changes in the way that we teach and learn. And for some programs, this was a reason to change the curriculum and introduce new teaching and learning methods. For some university programs, they found that there's a great deal they're competing with other universities for students. And I said some, I don't know any that's not true. Okay. Every university competes, and you know your own, what we call close competitors. I mean, there are some universities you don't compete with because the students that you recruit are not in that same pool. But and sometimes by changing the curriculum and updating your curriculum, you attract, it makes it attractive when you're hiring new instructors, new faculty members. It's attractive to them. And then for other programs, their graduates were having difficulty getting jobs. And so a need to look at your curriculum to see how it needed to change and to make better relationships with industry, with employers for your students. Now, I talked with your internship people before the program this morning. Here at ASAZI, the internship people, and they are really facilitating this connection with the employers across a number of fields. So those are the needs. This is the vision of the CDIO approach. And you will see in this, there is nothing that says engineering at this point, except for the letters CDIO. But our vision, what does the CDIO approach mean? What does this reformed curriculum and reformed approach look like? And it's in 5 areas. It's shown in the blue text. we look at an education, the education of students, set in the context of their professional practice. So this is why I say that this approach applies beyond engineering. For engineers, your professional practice is the practice of engineering. And you want to set the education of students in that context. If they are nursing students, you look at nursing practice. If they are business management students, you look at what business managers do. What is the practice of business management? What is the practice of industrial design? What is the practice? What is the profession? So the context becomes very important. Secondly, the curriculum, if we were to describe this new curriculum, or this revised curriculum, it's one that's centered on students, it's multidisciplinary, and it's based on learning outcomes. And you might say, well, of course, it's about the students. We wouldn't be here if it were not for the students. But this is very much, when we say that it's centered on the students and on what learning outcomes, it means our whole concern is about what students will know, be able to do, and have an attitude about when they finish the program. Everything else we do is to achieve that. So that's the curriculum. And in this new approach, we pay a lot of attention to active and experiential learning. Let me give you an example. This morning, in the next hour or so, or 2 hours, however we're in here, I would characterize this as not a learning situation. I will be sharing information with you, but you are sitting, listening to me. Now, you may be active learners and active listeners because you may be engaged in what I'm saying and sorting it out and making sense for you and applying it. Okay? But as an instructor, if I were an instructor, I would have no way of knowing that. Okay? Except if you fall asleep, then I can make the assumption that you are probably not engaged. Okay? But this will look at, even in a lecture situation, even in an auditorium, if this were a situation that were a teaching learning situation, my primary focus would be not on what I am telling you, but on what you come away with, what you have learned and been able to apply. So I have to use some strategies to help you to do that. Okay. So whatever learning method, we make it much more active and experiential, and we'll look at some of those. And that's a major part of, sorry, wrong button. Okay. Fourth, we look at and we update workspaces for students. Okay. You're going to say, well, we have a lot of laboratories, yes, but we look at the laboratories and we say, whose laboratory is it? Okay. Is this a place where the instructor does demonstrations? Okay. Or is this a place where students actually work? It is not to say that demonstration laboratories are not useful, but it's to say you need to find places that really are the students' workplaces and the students' laboratories. And then finally, this whole new approach will work only if you have some strategies for assessing both what the students learn and the overall success of your new curriculum. So that's our vision of this CDIO approach. Let me talk a little bit about the learning context. And I did mention something about that. So you have, let me deal with that. Okay, up here you have this is supposed to be business, medicine, teachers of elementary and secondary school. I think this is architecture, engineering, law. Just some examples. Now, I chose for engineering this little rocket ship because at MIT I work with the aerospace engineers. But what does it mean? What does the professional practice context look like? There's a focus on the needs, and now this is what your education and how you're educating students. They need to learn, in a professional context, there's going to be a focus on the needs of either customers or clients or patients if they're in medicine. There's a delivery of products or processes and services, and particularly engineers, this is what we do. We deliver products, processes, and services. In other areas, we deliver just services, retail. Okay? So it's not about always building something, but looking at the professional practice. In engineering, we build a lot of things, okay? Or we come up with a lot of different processes. There is a major concern for stewardship of the environment, a commitment to the environment, so that the products and services that we deliver, okay, are good and promote, conserve, and improve the environment. There's a focus on solutions and not disciplines. When you are practicing your profession, no one will ask you what you did in the third course in circuits. Right? There's not so much a concern with, did you take 2 courses in circuits? Did you take 3? Do you know the second law of thermodynamics? Okay. You're going to be given a problem situation, and you need to work toward a solution. Working with others and providing leadership, communicating effectively, working efficiently within resources. Whether or not it has to be profitable, it still needs to be within the available resources. So no matter which profession, this is kind of a general description of what the profession is. So what it's saying is, set your education in that context. And I'll use the example of engineers. Students come to university wanting to be engineers. They're very excited about this. They want to build things, or they want to take things apart and see how they work, and hopefully put them back together again. Okay? And traditionally, what do we do with them, with the students? We say to them, and my apologies to the mathematicians and the physics people in the room, but we say, all right, you need to take all your mathematics, all physics, you need to do all the engineering theory, okay? And by the time they're in their 5th or 6th or 7th, sometimes even later, 7th semester, we say to them, all right, now you can do something that engineers do. Now you can build something. Okay? Well, by the time they get to the 6th and 7th semester, they don't want to be engineers anymore. They've lost all their enthusiasm. And this is true of every profession. Okay? So in this approach, we're saying, right from the very beginning, let them be engineers. Let them introduce them to their practice. So for engineers who like to build things, let them build something. If there's software, in software engineering or software development, let them write a small program. Let them be involved. Now, it's very simple. Okay. In the aerospace department, we do not have them build a 747 in their first semester and get it to fly. But what's the principle? The principle behind aeronautics is they can get something to fly. Get it up in the air and stay there, you know, more than as long as it takes gravity to drop it. Okay? So very simple, something that will fly. Do they have all of the principles of aerodynamics? No. Okay. But when that object falls to the ground, we explain to them why it did. They didn't have enough mathematics and physics understanding. Right? So now when they go to their mathematics and physics class, they are learning about it because it fits into their professional practice. This is why they need to know that. This is why they need to know all of those principles. Okay? So it gives them some motivation. And I'll come back to that. So, an example of a learning context for engineers. The learning context means, what is it that an engineer does? What is it that a business manager does? What is it that a teacher does? And we were able to try to summarize the skills of engineering into 4 categories. And the Cdio, and I love it because we didn't originally choose it because you could say it in Espanol, but it's a wonderful side effect. It's the same letters. Concebir, diseñar, implementar, operar. Okay. This is what engineers do. They think of ideas, they talk to their customers, they look at regulations, they look at business plans, they get their requirements for whatever it is they're going to do, whether it's a product or a process or a service. They design. And the idea. They implement. Now many engineers call this, I don't implement because that sounds like I'm building. I'm a software engineer. Yes, but you put it into effect and you test it. Okay? So it's a transformation. It's going the process of going from the design to the actual operation. So manufacturing, coding, testing, validation. Actually taking your design and putting it into effect. If you're in teacher education, you design the instruction. In a sense, you make lesson plans. And implementar, you conduct the instruction. You deliver the instruction. Okay? You go from your plans to the actual operation in steady state. So it's the implemented product or process delivering the intended value. So this is how we came to call it the CDIO approach, because it grew out of engineering. Okay? But it stands for the professional practice of whatever profession you're talking about. When I don't know if I have the other example, no. When I was coming back to this professional practice, when I was doing a workshop at Unitec in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, when we did the workshop, there was one program of engineering. They were computer science, computer engineering. But there was another group of faculty who did the workshop with us who were from business management. So when we worked through the workshop, I encouraged them. The CDIO didn't make any sense for their profession, but I said, you need to look at your profession and come up with the main skills that all business managers do, no matter what kind of enterprise, no matter what kind of organization, and they did. Now it was still in draft stages, and it just so happened that they had 4 letters. There's no magic to having 4 letters, okay, or 4 categories of skills, but they did, and I think it was planear, organizar, dirigir, and controlar. Again, it was wonderful because it's PODC in Espanol and it's PODC in English. So, and that's not a requirement, okay? It just happened that way. Okay, so what are the central questions that we must ask ourselves when we look at any curriculum in a student-centered, outcomes-based curriculum? what knowledge, skills, and attitudes should students possess as they graduate from your university? So you're always focused on the outcome. What are they going to look like by the time they leave you? And depending on your profession, they should look pretty ready to engage in their profession. An earlier description of this process, Ed Crawley used to call it ready to engineer. So what should the students look like by the time they graduate? They're ready to engineer. They're not fully practicing engineers. They're just graduating from your university. Okay? But they're ready to engineer. And in fact, that for us at MIT, this was, and for several universities in the CDIO group, the reason we engaged, our need to revise our curriculum, and I'm going to speak about MIT and specifically the aerospace engineering program, is that the employers, the people in the aerospace industry who are hiring our students from MIT said, "You are sending us brilliant young people. They know their mathematics, they know their physics, they know their engineering principles, but they cannot engineer." So they were not saying, don't send us brilliant students who don't know that, but they're saying it's not enough. Send us students who are ready to engineer. So who know what it's like to be an engineer in the profession. And that was our need to reform our curriculum. Because it wasn't even, did they not get hired? Of course they got hired. They just had to say they were graduating from, in the US, they just had to say they were graduating from MIT, and of course they got hired. Okay. So it wasn't so much they weren't getting hired, but the people who were hiring them said, we have to do so much with them when they get to us because they're not ready to engineer. Okay. And specifically, you know, they would want to, you know, work in their own little cubicle by themselves, where competition, you know, they are, you know, eager to compete and to use their ideas and find new ideas, but it's not exactly what the engineering profession looked like when they got there, where people now mostly work in functional teams. They work in teams, so they have to communicate with their customers, they have to communicate with each other, so the need for us to reform. So we have to recognize what knowledge, skills, and attitudes should students have by the time they graduate. And the second central question is, how can we do better at ensuring that the students learn these skills? So notice the respect. We're not saying our program was broken, the curriculum was broken and it was something that needed to be fixed. We're saying, because that's often a criticism from, or a serious question from instructors in a curriculum, why do we have to change? You know, if it's not broken, let's not try to fix it. Okay. And that was true. It's not broken. So if you address it that way, that we're revising the curriculum because it doesn't work, it's broken, it's hard to persuade people. But I don't know anyone who would say, if you ask them, can we do a better job? Can we be better at what we do? I don't know of anyone who would say no. Okay? There's always room for improvement, so we approached it that way. When you're looking at these program outcomes, this what knowledge, skills, and attitudes should students have at the end of the program, they are always, always, always aligned with your own specific environment with your own universities. So these learning outcomes, program outcomes, resultados de aprendizaje, are always based on what is the mission of your university. What is the mission of Javeriana Cali? What is the mission of Universidad de la Valle? What is the mission of ICESI? They are not the same. Okay. If they were the same, you would not need 3 separate universities. So you have a different mission, you have a different vision for your university and for your students. You have overall goals, and what usually if you don't have the documents at hand, you should have internal documents that have all this spelled out. But if not, just go to your own website. You will usually find this information. What are the values of your institution? The values that you want to promote in your students and your instructors, your researchers, your teachers, your academic staff, your support staff. What values do you want them to demonstrate that shows, yes, we represent ICESI? Okay. And all of those have to be reflected in your program outcomes, because you want the person, the student who comes out of your university to reflect the values, goals, vision, and mission of that university. So you always need to keep it in mind. Okay, here are some examples of when I talk about program outcomes. Here are just 2 that are very common. Most programs now will include those as skills that are important, or attitudes that are important for their students. So recognizing or appreciating the differences in cultural enterprises and being able to work successfully in an organization. Okay. Leading and working in groups. Very common outcomes. And it's at this level that we talk about, that's a program outcome. We want students to have that attitude, to have that kind of recognition of the importance of. We want them to be able to do those skills. Now, again, in the CDIO approach, and by the way, there is at least, oh no, you're not all ICESI, okay, I was just going to say, there is at least 1 copy of that in your library here, and you may be able to persuade Decano Gonzalo to lend you his, but I doubt it. I don't think he's going to let go of it. But in the CDIO approach, these are the general outcomes that we're saying are true and valid for all engineering programs. So it's a starting point. It has not been tailored or customized for your university yet, but it's a starting point if you're thinking about program outcomes. And the way that if you, and by the way, you can find all this information about these program outcomes in what I'm going to call the CDIO syllabus, which is the outcomes at, and we'll see at the website for CDIO. And it's very easy, www.cdio.org. And it will get you there, and it'll be posted in a few minutes. But there are 4 main categories. I'm going to show you the first 2. Okay, so the technical disciplinary knowledge. Okay. The second one are personal and interpersonal, personal and professional characteristics, attributes, attitudes, characteristics. The third one is interpersonal skills, and the 4th one is CDIO. So when I say, I'm going to go back now, just so that you will, back, oh, not my computer's fault, mine. I hit return and I wanted it to go back. Okay. Maybe if I had it in Espanol, I would do it right. Okay. The first category of disciplinary knowledge, remember I said this These outcomes would apply to all engineering programs. The first one has to be customized to your disciplinary area. Okay. The first one is the basic mathematics, physics, biology, chemistry. But 1.2 and 1.3 really talk about what are the basic and applied and advanced principles in your own discipline. So if you are industrial design, if you are electronic engineering, you would define those outcomes here. If you're in another profession, you define your knowledge base in this category. What is it that students should know about your knowledge base? The second one, these personal and professional skills really apply to any program preparing professionals. Now, you may say, yes, but in our value statement, we put a lot of emphasis on critical thinking or creative thinking. And I don't see it there. Well, I'm only showing you the details at what we call the second level. So if you look at 2.3, Pensamiento Sistémico, at the next level of detail, you would find things like critical thinking, creative thinking. And if that's one of the main competencies at your university, for example, at a DeSazy, it's a common competency across the curriculum for all students who graduate from this, then you just want to give it more visibility when you're doing your own list of program outcomes. Instead of leaving it buried at the next level, put it up in that level. Okay? Have an outcome that says, now at this stage these are not really written as outcomes, they're really topics, or they look like competency statements. They're written as outcomes. It's thinking systemically. Okay? Students are able to think systemically. Students are able to think creatively. Students are able to think critically. Right. The same thing with interpersonal skills. Leading and working in groups, effective communication, and effective communication in languages other than the first language of your country. So for us, in the US, 3.2 is communication in English, and 3.3 would be communication in Spanish. And for you, it's just the reverse, or other languages. Now the fourth part, again, remember I said the Cdio is really what engineers do. But if you were going to adopt this approach to another field other than engineering, this is where you would define your professional practice. So the fourth category is really, what is the practice of the profession? Now, in this CDIO approach, we don't ever say to anyone, you have to use this list of program outcomes. They are not carved in stone. But if I were to say to you, all right, you need to come up with, for your program at your university, a list of program outcomes, and I say to you, start with a blank wall. This is going to take you many, many discussions and conversations. But if I say to you, start with this list, see what makes sense for your program, customize it, adapt it, add outcomes, take out the ones that don't apply. So the important principle here is not that you use this list, but that we have spent, because they are now described, and you will find this on the website, at the third and fourth level of detail. So we have really identified and described at several levels of detail what it means to lead and work in groups. So you can start all over and do this yourselves. There's nothing that says start with your blank wall. But if I tell you that this took us 2 years to get to this point, we can save you 2 years if you use this as a starting point. And that's all we're saying. Okay? Adapt it to your own professions. So why do we think that an outcomes-based curriculum is so important? Okay? Because we feel that looking at what students can do will help them, will educate students to be more effective contributors and leaders in their professions. We want to educate students to work in a more interdisciplinary manner. Interdisciplinary within engineering, so across engineering, but interdisciplinary with the basic sciences, interdisciplinary with other professions. The business program is a good example. To prepare students for increasing globalization. This is true of every country who participates in this process, in this approach. Increase awareness and response to environmental changes. Prepare instructors and students for different ways of learning, okay? For more project-based learning, okay? And projects that are relevant to their profession. To enhance university-industry cooperation and knowledge exchange. That throughout this process, you need to involve your stakeholders, your industry people, your employers, early on in the process. Engage them in the process of identifying needs, identifying outcomes in the process of curriculum change. Now, the first two, identifying the needs, they certainly have that information and will be, and I'm talking now about the employers, your industry partners. They have information and can provide you information about identifying the need for curriculum change. And they will be of great help in identifying the program outcomes, because they will know what it means to be an engineer and how students need to be ready with the program outcomes. When it comes to the next step about designing the curriculum, you as the faculty, okay, and administrators and support staff and academic staff, you know how to design curriculums, so they will be less helpful at that point. And yet, it's important to keep them informed about the process as you go through it. Looking now, so we've looked at the context, we've looked at the importance of the program outcomes, and so now we're going to look specifically at curriculum. And in this approach, we're not saying turn your curriculum upside down, right? So we looked at what are some curriculum structures that may be in place. And if we look at the first one, this is where traditionally in universities, this is where we are. And in this strict disciplinary curriculum, and this represents in terms of time, let's say semesters, this is semesters 1 and 2, lost it, okay, all the way up to semesters 9 and 10. So it goes this way. And this represents a discipline. Okay? Here is aerodynamics. Here is physics. Okay? Maybe here's language. Here's another, here's fluid dynamics. Or another engineering in your thing. And they, from start to finish, from semester 1 to semester 10, they're making progress in their own discipline. And very few times do they connect with each other. They're all, and this because this is how we operate in university. If you're a university instructor, you're hired for your expertise. which is the way it should be. You go into your classroom and you teach your subject area. Okay? So that's, this is not going to work if I need the microphone. At the other end, the apprenticeship model, oh, here's my little guy. We don't do this in university, but an apprenticeship model would say, and let me use the example that I used with the group this week, how do you learn carpentry, building with wood, building cabinets? How do you learn to be a cabinet maker? Okay. In an apprenticeship model, okay, you work with a master carpenter. And you have a simple project, again, in time. You advance to a more complex one, the next level, the next level. And really, there's no concern at that point to actually know the science of carpentry, or the physics of carpentry, or the mathematics. You just work with your master carpenter. You're an apprentice to that person. Okay. This is not a university education. Okay. But this is how, before we had universities, how did people learn in what is now called engineering? By working with the master, teaching the same thing, work with the master teacher. There are some, I'm going to come over to the left here to the problem-based curriculum. This is saying, now again, this is the problem. The curriculum in first year, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, is organized around a specific problem relevant to your profession. And here, and the problems get increasingly complex from one year to another. Here we go. From one year to another, the problems get more complex. But what's happening here is, in order to solve that problem, or build that project, you have to know the theory, you have to know the mathematics, you have to know the basic engineering principles, and I have a very stubborn little arrow. And they're woven in. So as you need to learn the theory, the mathematics, the physics, you learn them at the time you're doing the project. And by the end, by the time you have finished the 5th year and the 5th major project or problem, you have learned all of the theory and principles that you need, because those too get increasingly complex as you go from first semester to second. Now, you may be familiar with schools that are organized this way. There are programs at Aalborg University, for example, in Denmark. It started in the medical field, and they organized their program around problems. It's a problem-based. They also now have engineering programs that are a whole problem-based curriculum. Okay? And you're going to say, yes, I know about that program, and they're not happy with it. Okay? But it's an example. And I believe there may be 1 or 2 programs in the United States where their preparation of teachers, teacher education, may be organized this way. What we're saying in this approach that we've looked at is that none of our programs really wanted to turn everything upside down and turn it into a problem-based curriculum. Okay? So we're really looking at, and you probably guessed that because there's a circle around it, okay. We were really looking at taking this disciplinary curriculum, these are still the disciplines from 1st to the 4th, and not changing the structure of our entire curriculum, because it's set by different courses, okay? And you put them in a sequence. At most, in some of our programs, we might have changed the sequence of some of the courses, the blocks of courses, or taken some disciplinary content out of one and put it into another. But we did not change it significantly. But what happened is that we took all of those new program outcomes and integrated them across the courses. So for example, if students need to learn how to communicate effectively, both in Spanish and English, we didn't create another course and put another discipline there. We said that in the existing curriculum, they learn how to communicate in writing, orally, in Spanish and in English. They learn it in their profession. Because if it's important, for two reasons. One, if it's important to engineers to communicate effectively, they have to see their engineering professors communicating effectively. And they have to be required to communicate effectively about engineering issues. Right? So it belongs in the professional practice. And the second reason is, look at that whole list of learning outcomes. You cannot add all of those courses. I suspect that all of us are at the cap. We already have the maximum number of credits and the maximum number of courses. And the only way to add a new course is to take one out. Well, I don't know anyone who's willing to give up their course. You know, Circuits 3 is not going to say, you know, I think it's important to communicate, so take my Circuits 3 and teach them communication. You know, that's not going to happen. Right? So we talk about an integrated curriculum, which is very important. The skills and the projects are woven into the existing disciplines. Here's an example of what the curriculum might, this is only part of what a mapping might look like, and in a few weeks we will have an example from the engineering programs here at Cdio. But this is just shorthand across the top, what the second part, the second grouping in those CDIO outcomes. And these are the personal and professional skills, and along the left, the asignaturas. And that little code about, we also do an exercise about, for all of those new skills, will you introducir, enseñar, or aplicar? It's a much too detailed level for this short conference. But the curriculum map would look like this, and this would say, we are going to teach, I know that 2.1 is reasoning and problem solving, analytic reasoning and problem solving. And we are going to say that this is going to be taught, or at least introduced, in each of the courses where there is an X. Okay? So each of the skills. Now, one thing that was a little bit different about the exercise we did here at Unitec is that as part of the workshop, remember I mentioned before, we had the engineers, we had the business management people, but also present in that workshop were the mathematics instructors, the science instructors, the language instructors. So they were part of this curriculum redesign, so that when the group said, you know, algebra, because this was a group for, remember we said it was we worked principally on the computer engineering. We also worked on the business management. So it's one thing for the computer engineers to say, this should happen in the algebra course. And if the algebra course is not present in the room. So there was a lot of wonderful discussion that went on. But that's an idea of how what we're talking about integrating the curriculum. We're not changing the disciplinary structure. Those courses are still going to go on as they did before. But what we're saying is, as part of those courses, and you're not seeing here the bottom of the asignaturas are the engineering courses. As part of those courses now, we're saying you need to pay attention to those overall program outcomes, and they need to be taught and assessed in your course. Not all of them, not everything in that list, specific ones. And this was a wonderful exercise that we did yesterday. Another feature, another characteristic of this CDIO approach is to say, remember the example I gave before, that it's only in the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, or 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th semester that we actually let them practice their profession. And what we're saying here is, early on, in the first year, in the first, second, third semester, put in a project or a process that looks like your profession. So for us in engineering, we say this should be a first-year engineering course. Okay. For us at MIT, this is the example. And so in the diagram here, that first-year course is the scaffolding that appears here. Okay? So it becomes the framework now around which you can build all of those courses until you get to the final capstone that holds it in place. And as you know, with building arches, now you can take out the scaffolding and the whole thing is going to hold together. But they need that framework to begin with. The photo is really a photo from this is the project that at MIT, the first year students, now they're in their second semester, first year, and they're lighter than air vehicles. And the object here is that students simple design, and they're lit within a limit, a vehicle that will fly that's made either of 3 helium balloons or 4. So that's their, when I say limited design, you have to use helium balloons, you have to use these helium balloons. You can choose whether you want 3 or 4. And then they use just light balsa wood to build the frame of the vehicle. And it has to carry a certain payload, a certain weight of things. So simple range of design decisions. But they're very motivated, because here's something now that they're going to build and they have to fly it. Now, of course, we fly it indoors, because these are first year students in aerospace engineering. And there's no say that it may go up in the air, but it may not come down again. These are helium balloons. So we have them fly it in a gymnasium, so that if it doesn't stay and it does fly up, at least the ceiling will catch it. All right. But they're very motivated to study engineering, and it's in the first year. Okay? Gives them some early exposure to system building, teaches them early introduction to teamwork and communication. And now, the most important reason is that now they have a common experience. So when you introduce some engineering principles, you can go back and say, remember when your balloon, your lighter than air vehicle, when you tried to fly it, it went up to the ceiling. This is why. This is the physics you needed to know. This is the aerodynamic principle you needed to know. And they have to fly this thing around the gymnasium. So it has to turn corners. So you can imagine the first time they get it to fly, it crashes into the wall. It doesn't know how to turn. So you teach the principle about what will get it to turn. Now you say, well, why don't you teach all that so they do it right the first time? They don't know that. They don't have a context for thinking about what does it mean to get something that's flying to turn. What do all those controls mean? What do all those equations mean? They don't mean anything. Because remember, this is the first time they get something to fly. So the second time they get something to fly, okay, I've had this background, I've had this experience. And so this is the reason, whoops. And again, not a complex project. I mean, to me it looks complex, but I'm not an aerospace engineer, okay? And I really have no desire to get things to fly. I'd like them to be safe when I do fly, but other than that. So what we're saying here, and we call them design, implement, or build test, or design, build, test. This is the professional project, that you really have to have at least one, a basic one at the very beginning, leading up to the more advanced, complex one at the end. But they are always student-centered and self-directed. In other words, it's not a demonstration. It's one thing for me to say, let me, the instructor, show you step by step how to build this. They're student self-directed. They're organized around real problems, focused on authentic skills, collaborative, with faculty as facilitators. And so we say 2 or more projects at basic and advanced levels. And professional practice right from the start. My recommendation is, if you are not doing any of this, this may look very daunting. Start with one. Put one in at the end of the program. Or if you're planning to revise your program, put one in early on. And think about one basic one early and one complex one later. And maybe next year you think about, okay, we can put in another project at a basic or advanced level. Okay, but start small. When I talked about student-centered workspaces, you know, how do we use these workspaces and these laboratories to reinforce the knowledge that we're teaching in lecture. Okay? And here, you know, demonstrations are perfectly appropriate. To do research and discover new knowledge. Now, it's taken me quite a while to even figure out what that image is. But actually, this was a student project, and it's a gyroscope, and it's run by someone is pedaling this and causing it to spin. I don't think there are students on that spinning part, but there could have been. More complex project, system building. But one of the things that we found as a result of having these workspaces where students are free to build and to work in them when students work, because we all know that students' work hours are not the same as ours, or at least not the same as mine. We may work you know, in the daylight hours, or even if we work late, we might quit at 10 o'clock in the evening, or 11 o'clock, and that's the end of our work day. Well, it's the beginning of the students' work day. They work at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we were able to make these workspaces accessible to students 24/7. Not every part. Because again, the first rule is keep them safe. Keep yourself safe, keep the students safe, keep the workspace safe. So anything that is a little more dangerous to use, any of the machines, the lathes, we have some seriously dangerous looking equipment. Okay, that is secure, and it's open and accessible to students only when there is a shop supervisor. Okay. But for the other parts, what we did was we built a big space that has place for storage for students to keep the projects they're working on. There are tables, there are small simple tools. But what happened is that it became a place for students to gather. It became their community building. They got to know each other beyond the team that they work on their project. They got to know all of the other students, and they formed a real community. Sometimes just to support each other, because the first course they were going through is a very difficult course. It's a combination of about 6 or 7 different disciplines. In fact, they write themselves T-shirts, you know, I survived unified engineering. but they give each other moral support. And instructors stop by. Now, when you're thinking about that, you say, you know, we have very limited resources. Okay? If you're, and we're not MIT. If you're an MIT, Queen's Canada, the same Queen's University in Canada, Liverpool University, all of those universities, when they engaged in their reform of curriculum, built new workspaces for students, learning centers. At MIT, we didn't put a new building up, but we completely restored the existing building. And it cost a lot of money. But it's not necessary. At KTH in Stockholm, they took 2 classrooms that were adjacent to each other, took down the wall between the 2 classrooms, put in lockers, put in tables, put in simple tools, and said to made it accessible, and said to the students, this is your workspace. Okay? So the same things happened. They got together, they worked together, they had a place to leave their tools and materials. And did it cost money? Well, yes. But, you know, they took down the wall and painted and put in tables. When we look at student-centered teaching and learning in this approach, this diagram, I was just going to say, I could keep talking. You have to realize that I'm doing a 40-hour workshop this week, so it's hard for me to be contained in an hour, but I'll try to be a little bit brief about some of these. But some of these are very important concepts. And this diagram is really adapted from David Kolb, who wrote a book in 1984 called Experiential Learning. I believe the book is out of print now. But basically, his diagram is really the part in the blue rectangles, is his diagram. And the words around it are really the adaptation of the Cdio project. But basically, I'm going to start at the bottom at abstract generalization. It means we start, or at that point, in lectures, we give them the abstract principles, concepts, models, laws, okay? The principles of the discipline. And then if we go clockwise around the circle, we put students into smaller groups and tutorials and labs, and they, together, there were some demonstrations, they apply what they learned of those abstract principles in smaller groups. And some of you may have that situation. If you have a large lecture, you may put the students in smaller groups for a tutorial sometime during the week. You may or may not have that. At MIT, we call those recitations. So we have large lectures several times during the week, and then once or twice during the week, students meet in smaller groups with a small tutorial, very often with a teaching assistant who helps them to go over what they learned, to apply what they learned, or to solve some problems related to the lecture. Then, at a later point, we give them some concrete experience, projects, depending on if they're not engineers, if you're a teacher preparation or you're in nursing, you're not building something. So the concrete experience really comes from, and the professional practice really comes from field work. Send them out into the field to observe, to practice some aspects of their profession where the professionals do their work. And then finally we bring them back, or after the projects, or after the field work, we bring them back together and we say, think about what happened, think about what you observed, and we may ask them to do lab notes or journals or portfolios or lab notes. Now the reason that this is an important principle for us is that traditionally, if I were to ask you, traditionally, at what part of the circle do most people start? It's probably where I started to explain it. Okay? We start them off by giving them the concepts, models, and laws. Is that a bad approach? Absolutely not. Perfectly good approach. It's a very efficient approach to start with large lectures. But given the example that I gave you before, what we're saying in CDIO is sometimes start with the concrete experience. Okay? Start with the projects and field work for the very reason I gave you about flying that lighter-than-air vehicle. Okay? Because they see now the reason that I need to know. So you start with the concrete experience. If you're preparing a therapist of any kind, occupational therapist, okay, send them out early to do some observations in the field. You don't put them in charge, fully in charge of a real life person and say, okay, go do some therapy on them, okay, if I'm a first year student. But there's some aspects of that practice that I might be able to do. Certainly I want to do a lot of observation, but there may be some engaging with the patient in some way, checking to see what progress they're making from between visits, small parts of the process. Because what is that going to do? One, it's going to give them a background. So now when you teach me the principles, the basic science that I need to do occupational therapy or speech pathology, I've seen the work situation. Okay? I see why I need to know that. So I come back, I've built a project, now I do a journal or portfolio and I think about it. Then I learn the principles, now I apply the principles to a new situation. Because the concrete experience is limited to this one experience. I reflect on that one experience. Now I know the generalization. Now I can apply those principles to another situation. You can actually start anywhere around the circle. So we're saying don't always start in the same point, and principally because you need to think about what is their background experience. And if they are coming to you as university students with very little experience of the profession, the other thing that it does is it lets them know early on, what if they go out to a classroom because they think they want to be a teacher, and they spend some time in the first, second, third semester doing some observations out there. What if they discover, I do not have the talent for this and I don't like it? Better to know that in your third semester than in your 10th. Right? So lots of reasons for doing that. I'm going to skip over this part. And we look at, specifically in this approach, different types of teaching and learning methods that are going to engage learners. And there are any number of them. Now, keep in mind, and I should put it in there, you don't have a little balloon that says lecture. That does not mean that lecture is not effective. Okay? It only means that when I do these workshops and we look at this approach, most of the instructors already know how to present lectures. Does it mean that they can't learn how to do it better? No. But we spend most of the time on things they may not be familiar with. The principle here is the method that you choose always, always, always depends on what's the learning outcome that students need to achieve. Whatever that learning outcome is, it's going to give you a clue to what kind of teaching method is going to work best. The same thing with the assessment. We look at a variety of ways to assess student learning, and always, always, always related to the learning outcome. Whatever the learning outcome is, tells you, we'll give you an example. If the outcome is students will be able to lead and work in teams, okay, I can assess them with a written exam. I can give them a lecture and then give them a written exam about it, but it is probably not the most effective method. Okay. So my teaching means I have to engage students in learning how to work, and I have to put them in teams and teach them what it is to work in teams, and then come in at the end assessing. I assess them in teams, and I assess the way that they conduct themselves in teams. A very important part of any curriculum change, or any change, is that as you're doing this curriculum change, pay attention to faculty development. And particularly in this case, if you're now asking engineers to teach teamwork, teach communication, teach ethics, okay, and your instructors, they are engineering instructors. Most of them, I'll say US because I don't, and it may be the same for Colombia, have come out of university. You've gone to university, you've learned your engineering discipline, you've done research in your engineering discipline, you were hired to teach, okay, because you are experts in your discipline, and to promote your research. You're hired to teach and do research, whatever that balance is. And now we're coming to you and saying, and you may or may not have worked as an engineer in an engineering organization. So you yourself have not developed those skills of working in team, the kinds of communication, the kinds of discussing the kinds of ethical issues that arise in the company or organization. And now we're saying you have to teach those. So what we're saying is, I mean, you don't punish instructors because they don't have those skills. You don't fire them because they don't have those skills. But you have to support them in the development of those skills. So there has to be some faculty development in two areas. One, around those skills that we now want whatever professional practice to have. Okay? The same thing is with if you're preparing teachers. You may have gone to university and now you're, although for most places, if you're hired, you are not hired as a teacher preparing other teachers, elementary, secondary, unless you yourself have been a teacher for a number of years in elementary and secondary. But that's not the case with engineering and with other professions. So we need to support faculty as they develop those skills that we now expect them to teach. And secondly, we need to support faculty in learning some of these. How do you teach project-based learning? How do I operate in that kind of an environment? Okay, how do I operate in any environment where the students are not sitting in an auditorium or a lecture hall? We do some kinds of faculty development, very important. And then lastly, the importance of having some tools for looking at your whole curriculum and evaluating your curriculum. Okay. And for this you go back to why did you reform it in the first place? Is it better now than when we started? Does it answer the need that presented itself when we started? Okay. And that's the curriculum evaluation process. So in the CDIO approach, each of those, what I call major principles, is described as what we call the CDIO standards, but there are 12 characteristics that describe what does the CDIO approach look like, and these are the ones that I just looked at with you. These are characteristics. And why did we write these standards? Okay? because we went back to those employers who said to us, you know, do something so that they're ready to engineer. So we changed our curriculum and we put all these things in, and we went back to them and we said, will you, now that we've revised our curriculum, will you give priority to students who have graduated from a CDIO program? This is what, because now we think they're ready to engineer. And of course their response to us was, how will we know a CDIO program when we see one? And we thought, that's a very good question. And this is why we developed the standards. And we said, a CDIO program has these characteristics. And I told this story too this week. We were bold enough, not just MIT, but MIT and several of the other programs around the world who are now CDIO programs. We were bold enough to go back to the employers and say, not only will you give priority in hiring to students who graduated from CDIO programs, but will you pay them more? They appreciated the question. We don't have an answer yet on that. Okay, so I'm going to end it there. The rest, maybe I have. Let me just skip over. There's some basic principles for, if you're going to engage in this curriculum change, there's some strategies for making it more successful. They really come out of the business literature, but I'm going to just skip over them. You will find them though at the CDIO website, and there are only 5 listed on the screen, but at the CDIO website, I think it's called something like 12 or cultural change factors, and you'll see them there, but I'm going to skip them here. And just, let me back up and for you to think about your own, what are your own main challenges to designing and putting into place a curriculum now that's focused on that's centered on students and focused on outcomes. And it asks you to look, is your biggest challenge going to be trying to determine, so identifying and addressing the needs of program stakeholders. Well, let me just do this by a show of hands. For you in the room, is identifying and addressing the needs of your program stakeholders. What are the needs for curriculum change? Is that a big challenge, a moderate challenge, or not so difficult? For how many of you is that a big challenge? Just by raising your hand. Big challenge, okay. How about a moderate challenge? Okay, not so difficult. Okay, we got 0 response. Okay, again, you see, if this is a conference, so I'm not going to, if this were a teaching learning situation, I would use a strategy that really called for a response from you, okay? And I would not go ahead until we got a response. But since this is not, let me just say what people have found to be big challenges. Persuading faculty to shift their focus to an outcomes-based curriculum. How do you get students on board? These are challenges. Integrating professional practice throughout the curriculum. I suspect this is going to be a big challenge. Providing relevant experiences for students in a cost-effective way. The resources are always going to be a challenge. And then sustaining enthusiasm for curriculum reform beyond the initial stages. You go to a workshop, and I'll give you the example of Assisi, we've now spent an entire week together. People are very enthusiastic. Okay? And so you will start, well, they've already started their curriculum reform, but you'll go back and you have a new energy, and you work on this for a while, and then another month or two, so the challenge is to keep people engaged and excited. What I did want to show you, just to finish, this is kind of the, here's the CDIO organization pitch. But as of the 1st of May, there were about 60 universities around the world who have adopted the CDIO approach. There are There is one in Colombia, and that is Javeriana University in Bogota. It's their Department of Electrical and Electronic Engineering. Okay. I suspect in the coming months there will be 2 or 3 more schools in Colombia who will add to that number. And that the other 3 schools, the one in the Central America is Tegucigalpa, is Unitec in Tegucigalpa that I mentioned. And the 3 schools in Chile who are members of the Cdio region, Cdio organization, is Universidad de Chile, Universidad de Santiago de Chile, and Universidad Católica de la Santísima Concepción in Concepción. And so you see the distribution around the world. If you want more information about the CDIO approach, I'd be very happy to come back to Cali. The CDIO website, www.cdio.org, has lots of information. This is the book of the title of the talk. Okay, I am one of the co-authors. It was published in 2007. This summer and into the fall, we are beginning to work on the 2nd edition. It has been translated, or you don't really care how many languages, but it has been translated but not yet published in Espanol. Javeriana University in Bogota has translated it into Spanish, so now it's a process of getting Springer to publish it. When we have CDIO meetings around the world, the first day of the meeting is an introductory workshop. It's usually a day-long workshop that takes what I said today and expands it to an entire day. Every year in the month of June, there is an annual international conference that goes to different places around the world. This year, last month, which was June, the international meeting was in Copenhagen. Next June, it will be in Sydney, Australia. But 2013, the June meeting, will come back to MIT. So this will be a little closer for you to get to, I think, than Australia. Certainly closer for me. But then it says, contact a CDIO university in your country or region. When the CDIO organization began to expand around the world, it's very difficult for schools, for universities to come to all of the international meetings. So we divided the world, we divided the CDIO world into regions. And it also made it possible for the region to customize the education to the culture of that region. So as of January of this year, there is now a region for Latin America. And it is led by Javeriana in Bogota and by Universidad de Chile. So they will soon be holding regional meetings for universities in Latin America. And so again, when they have a regional meeting, and you don't have to be a member to go to the regional meeting, they will have introductory workshops, they will invite speakers in education, not engineering. This is not about engineering research, this is about the teaching of engineering. So they will invite speakers who will talk about different aspects of teaching, and it's an opportunity to network with schools. Now here in Cali, I would encourage you, if you want to talk about this whole approach, to contact Decano Gonzalo. And he will put you in touch with his faculty who are doing tremendous work in revising the curriculum. It's pretty impressive for what they've already accomplished and the energy that they have moving forward. So he would be a good source of information, and I apologize if you're sitting there saying, oh no, please don't call me. And if I can answer any I don't want to hold you because I've already kept you in your seats for a long time. But if you are interested, I brought a few cards with me. If you want to take my card and contact me, I will answer a few questions now. But if you have some questions and you don't have a chance to talk with me today, if you email me, and you can, I'll make it easy for you, you can email me in Espanol. I may answer you in English, but I can read Spanish. So if you have questions. So let me take a couple of questions, if I can address a couple of questions now. You can ask them in Espanol. If I don't understand them, I'll ask the guy. Sí.
¿Qué escuelas en Estados Unidos han adoptado la metodología?
How many and where are they doing it? What universities in the USA? You saw that there were 11. Let's see if I can come up with them. MIT, a small school in New Hampshire called Daniel Webster, Penn State University, Duke University, Midwest, U.S. Naval Academy, University of Michigan, Arizona State University, University of Colorado, University of California at Northridge. Here's some examples. Not Ohio State. We have some discussions with Purdue University. Oh, and I know the new one because, I didn't tell you about this meeting. The next international meeting, it's not a conference, but the next international worldwide meeting will be held in California, in Monterey, which is a beautiful part of California, at the Naval Postgraduate School, who are brand new members of the CDIO organization, and they are going to host that meeting. And again, they will have a workshop the first day of the meeting. It's in October. So if you would like to visit Monterey, California in October, which will be great, there will be a CDIO meeting there. I'm trying to think, there was in Florida, how could I forget? And the newest members are in Florida, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And again, if you go to the website, that reminds me, if you go to the website, on the first page there is a link to CDIO collaborators. And it'll give you a list of all of the schools around the world, so you will find ones in the US. But if you click on them, it gives you the name and contact information of the person who leads that program. And all of them would welcome your questions. So if you contacted them by email and said, Professor Brodeur said, call you,